In terms of operation, upon the formation of a new government or a reshuffle or the introduction of a new minister, what actually happens?
Well, usually the propriety and ethics team form part of the sort of core team involved in a reshuffle, because actually within their team are also the people that kind of have the board for the reshuffle as well. So they help administer the reshuffle, and if the Prime Minister requires any advice, they will provide that on an ad hoc basis as part of that process.
Are you aware of how any issues might be flagged by different agencies, for example, HMRC?
Look at that. Sweating now, he knows where this is going.
Well, the Cabinet Secretary is the principal advisor to the Prime Minister, so he will provide any advice as required, and he, as I would, and indeed the Prime Minister would draw on the resources of the propriety and ethics team. However, as I'm sure this committee will appreciate, specific advice given to the Prime Minister in respect of Prime Ministerial appointments is something that remains confidential between the Cabinet Secretary and the Prime Minister. Is
there specific advice, though, or is it just a general flag? Is it specific advice on whatever the issue might be, or is it just a general flag that there is an issue?
Well, I think when you refer to flag, this means specific media speculation in respect to that. In terms of the advice, it goes two ways. So either the Cabinet Secretary can provide advice to the Prime Minister, or the Prime Minister can seek that advice.
Okay, so my understanding, which may be totally warped by what I read in newspapers, but my understanding is that there isn't specific advice from different agencies such as HMRC. It's just the nature that there is an issue, and that the Prime Minister should be aware that there is an issue.
Well, in respect of HMRC, there's a well-established convention that members of the committee will be familiar with. This is an important convention of the privacy of individuals' tax affairs with the HMRC, and I think that's an important principle, that ministers should not, even the ministers that oversee HMRC, do not have access to individual cases. So that is in this sort of set.
When he means privacy, he means especially the ones who are dodging their tax. Is that what you mean, Oliver Dowden?
Separate compartment, as it were.
So, that being so, if a minister was appointed to a position and a flag was raised, quite rightly the Prime Minister and other ministers and everybody else wouldn't know what the issue was with their tax affairs. They would just know that there was an issue.
Yes, the principle of the privacy of an individual taxpayer's affairs is upheld. I think you're beginning very gently to draw me into the circumstances of the minister without portfolio and the chairman of the Conservative Party. As you know, there is an ongoing investigation conducted by the.
Yes, that old chestnut. Yes, there's an investigation, so I'm not going to comment on that. You can tell he doesn't want to go anywhere near this, does he?
Independent advisor, so I just need to be careful that I don't start straying, however inadvertently, into the facts of that case and prejudice it in any way.
No, I'm not trying to be unhelpful, because if there was an issue raised when a hypothetical minister was appointed under a brief administration in the summer, an issue was raised there, that issue was dealt with, then when he or she was reappointed to another brief administration in the autumn, and indeed a subsequent one after that, no flag might be raised.
I think what you're describing is so clearly the allegations that pertain to the minister without portfolio. If I was to provide any further commentary on that I risk prejudicing that investigation. All those matters will be dealt with by that investigation, and the outcome of that will be received shortly by the Prime Minister.
But the point I'm trying to establish is if there are issues raised through the process of appointment to the propriety and ethics team, the nature of that issue is not shared, it is simply that there is an issue.
Forgive me, could you just repeat that one side?
What I'm trying to establish issue is not shared, simply that there is an issue.
That's brilliant.
Forgive me, could you just repeat that one side?
What I'm trying to establish is that if an issue with a prospective or newly appointed minister is raised from HMRC, the nature of that issue is not shared. It is simply the fact that there is an issue, and it's therefore incumbent on that prospective minister or newly appointed minister to sort that matter out.
Yes, so it would not be the case that it would be divulged to the Prime Minister or any minister the details of a minister or indeed any private individual's tax affairs, because that would breach the principle of confidentiality of a person's private tax affairs. What is incumbent on ministers is to provide a declaration in accordance with the ministerial code, and that obligation vests with the minister themselves. Separately, it is the case that the Prime Minister can seek advice from the principally the Cabinet Secretary relying on the Propriety and Ethics team, or indeed the Cabinet Secretary can provide advice to the Prime Minister without such a commission. But in respect of any of that advice, it would not be the case that the Cabinet Secretary, even in providing that advice, would breach the confidentiality of the individual's private tax affairs, because that we're all cognizant as ministers, and indeed the HMRC is particularly cognizant of the fact that we must maintain that privacy of individual tax affairs, because the potential repercussions of ministers knowing, or indeed officials outside the function of HMRC knowing the details of an individual's tax affairs could have bad read across, let's put it like that.
Indeed. And so therefore, just to round off what I'm trying to get to on this, if the issue has been resolved previously under a different administration, there's no reason why that issue would be flagged to a future Prime Minister. It would be solely dependent on a voluntary disclosure from that Minister to the Prime Minister for them to have any knowledge of it at all.
Well, Mr. Ragg, as you know, I'm trying to hold this quite careful line, which is that I don't want to in any way speculate on the facts of a case that is before the independent.
I bet you don't. Oh dear. You could tell he's bottoming as he's going through this. He doesn't like to, don't want to touch it, does he?
Advisor. I think as a matter of abstract principle, that would be correct, but I think I'd have to leave it at that.